Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this SDG dialogue about the role and responsibility of men and boys in eliminating violence against women and girls. Today's dialogue is convened by the leadership of the United Nations. We thank the United Nations Group of Friends for the elimination of violence against women and girls for their support. The Friends Group was established in 2020 in response to the United Nations Secretary General's appeal for peace at home and in homes during the COVID-19 pandemic. The group includes 94 UN member states and global partners united in their commitment to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. I'd like to welcome our guests who are in the SDG studio with me today. Olaf Skog, who is the chair of the Group of Friends and the head of the European Union delegation to the United Nations. Welcome.
Thank you.
And then I have Griselda Gonzalez Lopez, the permanent representative of El Salvador to the United Nations. Welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. Nice to see you.
Then we have Colleen Vixen Kayla Pillay, who is the permanent representative of Botswana to the United Nations and also president of the UN Economic and Social Council. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And last but not least, Dr. Natalia Kanem, Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. Welcome, Natalia.
Thank you.
We will also be hearing from the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, the EU Commissioner for International Partnerships, Jutta Urpilainen, and Spotlight Initiative Global Advocate Sia Kolisi in today's program. But before we get into discussion, let's frame the issue and get a basic understanding of what it looks like to engage men and boys in order to prevent violence against women and girls from a program in Belize funded by the Spotlight Initiative.
My name is Gerald Jones, a member of the Belize Police Department, and I believe that violence is never acceptable or excusable. We must make an effort to stop it. There is no excuses to violence.
Real men do not abuse women, girls, and children under any circumstances. Men have to set example for boys to renounce any form of violence against women and girls and put a stop to it. Our women are partners in creating a safe space for our children and their children. As men, it is our responsibility to end violence and abuse towards women. Less violence and more love.
Gender-based violence is not just a woman's issue. It is a human rights issue. Women and children should not feel unsafe in their own homes where they should feel the safest. Let us fight against all forms of violence.
I believe that no society can fully develop while marginalizing women. Development can only be successful when it is inclusive and equitable for all. The relationship between women and men must be built on equal power, real partnership, and mutual respect. If people work together, we can bring an end to gender-based violence.
I will play a role in creating a cultural and social shift that no longer tolerates violence against women, girls, boys, and other men. We all have responsibility, so I will challenge my friends, family, neighbors, and my co-workers to end gender-based violence.
Violence against women and girls may be the world's longest, deadliest pandemic. 1 in 3 women worldwide has directly experienced violence. Every 11 minutes, a woman is killed by a partner or family member, often in the place where she should be safest, her own home. We cannot accept a world in which 1/2 of humanity is at risk in the streets, in their homes, or online. We must end violence against women and girls now, and it starts with changing the hearts and minds of men and boys. Men created this scourge. Men must end it. This means all men looking in the mirror and pledging to uproot the lopsided power dynamics, toxic masculinity, and cultural norms and stereotypes that have fueled this violence over millennia. That is why, in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, I called for an end to the rising surge of violence against women and girls. We know change is possible. Thanks to the generous support of the European Union, the UN Spotlight Initiative has educated 880,000 men and boys and counting about positive masculinity, respectful relationships, and non-violent conflict resolution. From taxi drivers to sports clubs, men are actively participating in programs to prevent gender-based violence and support women survivors. Throughout, the United Nations is working with the governments and legislators to strengthen laws and regulations to better protect women and girls and provide protection and counseling services. And since its creation in 2020, in response to my call to action, the Group of Friends for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls, now nearly 100 members strong, has been critical to this work. But it's time to do more, all of us. This is not an issue belonging to any one country. And the COVID-19, we have seen dramatic increases in violence against women in every region of the world, from Europe to Asia, from Africa to the Americas. The proposals laid out in our common agenda provide a roadmap to tackle this challenge with the strategic urgency it deserves. We call on every member state to develop an emergency plan to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. This meeting is an opportunity to initiate the actions needed to bring your plans to life. An opportunity to coordinate your plans with one another, drawing on the UN's expertise and the positive models provided by the Spotlight Initiative. And an opportunity to get other member states to join this essential work. Let's work together to ensure that every woman and girl can live their lives free from violence with the safety, dignity, and freedom they deserve.
The Secretary General, dear panelists, just described male violence against women and girls as the world's longest and deadliest pandemic. He also said men started this scourge and we need men to end it. So first of all, I'll call on Ambassador Olaf Skog. Do you agree?
Yes, I do agree. I'm afraid that the Secretary General is right when he puts out the numbers and the need for us to do much, much more. And you know, when I saw the appeal that he made during the pandemic in 2020, I asked my staff, you know, why aren't we working, you know, on this among ourselves here in the UN? Isn't there a group of friends or something that does something? You know, we have over 100 group of friends. All of them, sure, busy with very urgent issues, but for this one, there wasn't really any, you know, committed work going. And given that it's a global phenomena, and with an added urgency during the pandemic when people and women and girls were locked in together with the perpetrators of some of this violence. So we said, let's set up a group of friends where we can compare best practices. And I mean, we just heard now from Belize, you know, some very interesting men speaking about their role and how they have maybe changed their attitudes to this. So this is a little bit the purpose of why we're trying to make a step change and how we collect ambassadors here from various parts of the world to try to just improve and end the scourge, as the Secretary General just said.
So just for people who don't work inside the UN, groups of friends, that is...
Well, it's like, you know, you try to identify various countries that share a certain concern and try to come together and work to how to fix it or to improve the way we work with it. And I think the most effective way to do this is to have countries from different parts of the world. So this group, which now consists of, I think, 94, San Marino just joined today, by the way. Oh. So we're getting close to 100. Really encompasses, you know, all the continents of the world, because, as the Secretary General rightly said, this is a phenomenon that is not unique to any country or to any part of the world. It's really, unfortunately, global.
Right, just like the COVID-19 pandemic was and all of the problems that came with it, and this is one of them. Very powerful, though, to see almost 100 countries coming together and saying, stop, and at the community level, seeing so many men and boys also joining forces. now going to ask Ambassador Gonzalez Lopez of El Salvador if you'd like to give your views.
Yes, definitely. I mean, that was a powerful message from the Secretary General. And building upon what Olaf mentioned about how this group of friends was built, I guess it's important also to draw some comparisons between the COVID-19 pandemic and this violence against women phenomenon that all countries are living and dealing with it. So COVID-19 was so contagious. And as well, violence against women and girls is very contagious. And maybe you don't know that you have COVID. Maybe you don't know that you are being a perpetrator. So being able to deconstruct all these attitudes is very hard. So you have to have help to that. Other thing, for instance, drawing comparisons with COVID, is these long-term consequences that people are living and the survivors, for instance, of violence against women. And the other thing that I was trying to think about this very interesting comparison between COVID and violence is that, for instance, we were making this appeal that no country was safe until all countries were completely safe for COVID. I will say the same thing about women. Not women and girls will be safe until all are safe. And that's why it's so important to get and to work together like intersectoral approaches, just like we were doing with COVID-19, that all institutions were involved to trying to fight the pandemic. We need the same cooperation, the same involvement with different sectors from society, but also intergenerational solidarity, such as it was in COVID a key factor to try to fight the pandemic, also this pandemic that we have been living for so long.
Just a quick follow-up, though. What was it about COVID, do you think, also just as a woman yourself, that exacerbated this tendency for men to be violent against the women they live with?
Let me give you my personal experience dealing with COVID-19. I was at home 24/7 with my husband and my daughter. To me, it was a personal and very beautiful time to live with my family, to reconnect with my one-year-old daughter. Many women didn't have that opportunity. Many women were living 24/7 with the perpetrators. Young girls, little girls were living with this kind of fear all the time. I was blessed. At what moment I was feeling really happy, as I mentioned you, to reconnect and to be and try to deal also with work and family at the same time. But I was not living in fear. But imagine how many had to live with that.
Yeah, so not as many avenues for escape, and yeah, and also probably the economic factor of so many women losing their jobs. So I'd like now to turn to Ambassador Kayla Pillay, Botswana. What do you think? What has been your perspective also?
No, I think I fully agree with my dear colleagues, all of them agree on their observations. But then, apart from just agreeing with the powerful words by the Secretary General, we have to look back and really see how we got to this point. As we all know, it has been said before, gender-based violence is not a new issue. We know it had always been there before COVID-19. But the problem we are facing now, it has escalated. The figures are very, really threatening, and to even imagine. How did we get, first of all, these societal structures that condone subordination of one gender to the other and emboldening the other to achieve superiority over the other one? So we must try to work with our communities to try to do some redesigning, so to speak, or socialization to unlearn this kind of behaviors. And in order to do that, we will need to engage with our societies, because that is where it started. How do we work with our communities to address the problem, including really making the buy-in that is needed for them to also be part of the solution because it started with our own societies, so it has to be resolved by our societies collectively. Right. And I believe that working with communities to contribute to the solution, especially men and boys, they are the gatekeepers of many of these norms and the way it is designed. So they must be part of the solution, certainly. Indeed. So that is the big question.
We learned also from COVID-19 that the way to have the most influence is to work at the community level. Behaviors change when you work with communities. However, you're an ambassador representing your country here, and you've joined this group of a big group of other countries. So what can be done at the international level, do you think?
Yeah, the international community has a role to play. I mean, we might, of course, the starting point normally would be, do we have the capacities that the countries need in order to support the communities to address the problem? That includes the issue of funding, which cuts across. Yeah. Then I would think that advocacy for financing initiatives that involve men and boys, could be helpful, so they can play the role that we're expecting them to play. At the UN level, I think we are known for setting global norms and the regulatory frameworks, the framework that can guide countries on setting the real baselines on how can we, as the international community, work together to guide countries on the initiatives and policies that are needed to be put in place to support the countries to at least cause the change. I'm lucky to be president of ECOSOC, which is home to a huge system, subsidiary bodies that focus on many aspects of this issue. We just opened the Commission on the Status of Women, which is very key. Yeah. The one on population and development is key. There are quite several. So I think let us leverage the comparative advantages that the UN system has to really bring different perspectives of the solution to bear onto this problem. So I think the principal organs like ECOSOC, which I lead, has a lot that it can contribute to also guide our countries really to develop the right regulations to address the problem.
Yeah, and indeed it is very inspiring to have these powerful male voices, the Secretary General, exactly. The two of you as permanent representatives of your countries and leading important European Union and ECOSOC. So thank you for that. That's incredibly helpful. I think it makes a huge difference to hear from men. I wonder, Dr. Natalia Kanem, UNFPA, I know that this is an issue that you are personally passionate about and also, of course, professionally passionate because it's such a core of for the organization you lead.
It's a human rights issue, and it's very important to see that the group of friends is formed when our Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said peace in the world and peace in the home. He actually opened a ray of hope into a conversation that is seen as an intimate issue, an issue for the family. When the woman reaches out for help, a police person who's untrained will say, oh, this is a family matter, let me back away. So the issues of silence and the male authority figure issues are ones which need investment to change. They didn't come up overnight, but it shouldn't take 50 years for these attitudes to change. And I think when the European Union in the Spotlight Initiative joined with the United Nations, it was tagged to the human rights issues that the Sustainable Development Goals that our common agenda addresses. It's an issue of fairness and equality. What holds us back is women's reluctance very often to break the sanctity of the family in which she should be protected, in which that girl should be protected. So the importance of boys, men, religious figures, sports people, all banding together, and of course, women themselves raising the demand for equality. This takes a sustained effort. It does take an investment, but it's a signal now that we're no longer letting every 11 minutes a woman's life be annihilated in silence. now we are speaking up. The community level is the most crucial level, because what we're talking about is every adolescent girl coming up knowing that she's of value and that she has rights and she should be respected. And I think a lot of the hope that I see is in the younger generations who are very much more open to the understanding that everyone is equal, no matter who you are. And also they're very open to the understanding that the type of bullying and intimidation and harassment, which we don't count in that 1 in 3 figure, by the way, because so far it's not interpreted as physical violence. But with our Body Right campaign saying the same way we have copyright over objects, everyone's body is their own, we really hope that technology will not aid perpetrators of violence. So I'm inspired to think that through the group of friends, through Spotlight, at any community level in any country, a girl will know their resources, a woman will know there's a hotline that I can reach out to, and the acceptability of, sweeping things under the rug is changing before our eyes.
Okay, a quick follow-up to you, because you mentioned the Spotlight Initiative, and I think you have seen it at work in very practical terms. I mean, maybe I'll ask you to describe the Spotlight Initiative a bit more, but I know that, you visit countries around the world, and there has been a lot of investment through the Spotlight Initiative to work with boys and men to change social norms around toxic masculinity and gender-based violence, and that there are funding interventions that are happening targeting men and boys. But do you ever get criticism to maybe talk a little bit about that, but why funding the men and boys as opposed to that funding directed to women and girls who also may need it for their support?
Well, for UNFPA, and also speaking for the other Spotlight partners, because working closely with UN Women, with UNDP, and actually quite a lot of the UN has signed on for this front and center, it's not a trade-off. And I believe that women and girls are appreciative of the male ally who will stand up and interrupt a cycle of violence. In a place like Sri Lanka, for example, the funding that allows us to work on violence in transport, and in particular the protection of girls who may be going back and forth to school, this has been well appreciated. In El Salvador also, I think there's been coalitions led by religious leaders, many of them men, which don't portray the issue as an either or. Gender is for everyone. It is not a female issue. And the issue of stopping gender-based violence has to be a whole of community effort.
Okay. Olaf, I just quick follow-up, because I know the EU gives so much money for this Spotlight Initiative. Why?
Massive investment a couple of years back with 500 million euros. That would be to benefit the end of violence against gender-based violence. But just to correct, it's not just about promoting men's and boys' participation here, which I think is a discussion we're having today, and we all agree how important that is. But, and Natalia mentioned before, hotlines for women in distress, etc. Those could also be part of the kind of projects that the Spotlight Initiative could benefit. So it's across the board. It's a massive investment in women and girls around the world. Yeah.
Thank you for that important clarification. Indeed, we focus primarily on the women and girls, but now with a special focus also on men and boys, because, as you said, it is the issue isn't gender specific, right? So unfortunately, he couldn't be here with us today, but we have Sia Kulesi, who is a UN global advocate for the Spotlight Initiative and the captain of the South Africa national rugby team. Yes. So we're asking him to address us on his thoughts on positive masculinity, on being a role model, and on having difficult conversations among men. Here's what he said.
Hello everyone, it's Sia Kulesi here. Being a male athlete, talking about gender-based violence has really been quite a challenge in the sense that, not a lot of men want to talk about it, not a lot of men want to hear about it. especially when I share things on social media about it. You often see more women have looked at it or shown interest towards whatever post that I'm doing. And but yeah, I cannot get discouraged with that, because women have been fighting a long time for gender-based violence. And I think me adding my voice will hopefully help other men to join the journey, because it's been a learning journey for me. I think it gets hard because I look at myself, what have I done in the past? Have I had opportunity where I could have stopped someone, my friends, people close to me? And it's those things that I battle with as a man, and sometimes I don't know what to say. So that's why I'm not scared to ask questions from women or people who know a little bit more about it. So I'm trying to encourage other men that we all go on this journey together. We'll never know everything, but we'll definitely do know what's right and wrong. And also, like for me, I haven't physically had things happen to me, but I've seen physically when I was 5 years old, seeing things happen to my mother, things happened to my aunt, and yeah, that's really stuck with me. And I was helpless at the time, but now I have a platform, and I gotta use my platform in a way that this don't happen to other women. It doesn't have to be someone's mother. Any human being should feel affected by this crime, because we make life far too cheap, and I really want to, hopefully I can use my voice. And through the foundation, we've been working, actually even trying to prevent gender-based violence by giving packs to women to try and get help before something even happens, working with communities and working with survivors of gender-based violence. And I'm going to keep on fighting, and I'm going to keep on using my voice and working with the foundation to make sure that this does come to an end. And I try at home as well with my son to try and set a good example by treating my wife well, by making sure when I'm upset or not agree, walk away, and things that I saw as a child, don't try and do them in front of them, and talk to my son when he does things at the moment and explain to him. My wife is very good at that. Explain to him why he shouldn't act that way or do that way. And also my daughter, try and just treat her with respect, and I try to treat her equally with my son, and my brother and sister as well. I have to set a good example as much as I can. Obviously, I'm not perfect. I do make mistakes, but I would like men to encourage men to talk a bit more, use their platform. And also we need to deal with the problems that we have inside us as men, trauma that we face as children, so that we can move past that and talk to women. Ask a simple question: what can I do in this moment? Because we don't always know the answers, but we can always ask. That's just from me, and I'm looking forward to doing more work with the UN to try and tackle this challenge going forward, not only in South Africa, but in countries all around the world. Thank you.
What an authentic way to speak. I mean, honestly, we see celebrities and it sounds very formulaic, but I mean, that was just so...
From the heart.
From the heart, yeah. I was here. And from the arms, yes. Not someone you'd want to wrestle with, but I think, you were talking about cultural change, and I wonder, Olaf, to what extent, what is your reaction to how he spoke, and what effect do you think?
I think it's super impressive and important to have clearly a role model from the sports world, and also a sport which I don't engage in myself, but I understand is one of the most physical, it's sort of the symbol of masculine strength in a way, right? And here you have a person who comes from, and he speaks about his own experience of having seen his close relatives suffering from this, and when he speaks out, I think it just has a tremendous impact. I'm very impressed, and I think that kind of statement is really, really powerful, showing that masculinity is about equality.
Wow, I like that. Masculinity is about equality. He spoke a lot about his journey, and he even acknowledged that he had witnessed in his own family gender-based violence. I wonder, Ambassador Gonzalez-Lopez, how did you react to what he said?
Well, in El Salvador, we don't follow rugby, but we love football and we're passionate about it. So I'm very happy to see Khaleesi, this champion, and to see that we also have our own Spotlight Initiative champion in El Salvador. And it's basically one of the most popular figures of sports. It's a sports broadcaster. And I'm very happy to see him so involved about, deconstructing these attitudes, masculinities. And one of the most, I guess, effective ways that he has engaged with our population is by giving these short, concrete, but powerful messages comparing football with this kind of attitudes. So, for instance, one of the most popular ones is in life and in football, be a team player. In life and in football, we don't tolerate violence. But also he has been able to work in other kind of messages that he conveyed, for instance, this awareness on gender pay gap or the gender gap in education. And following what Natalia was saying, but also Olaf, about the importance of these role models, to me this is so important to have this male figure, because maybe boys, youth, and men can better relate to these kind of messages, and it's more powerful to them to try to double think about the things that they believe are normal, like this kind of violence. So I guess it's very good initiative, thanks to the Spotlight, the EU, and also many of our partners in El Salvador that are very creative and trying to engage with the population in this kind of different settings.
Great to hear that there's also such a figure in El Salvador. And I wonder, Ambassador Kayla Pillay, what was your reaction? I had the sense that you knew him and that you might be a rugby fan. How do you think his message is coming across to his fans?
Indeed. No, I wouldn't say I know Sia Khaleesi, but I happen to have read something about his story very recently. For me, having grown also through almost similar backgrounds back home, I could easily relate to the kind of role model that comes in this fashion. Somebody who is able to relate to personal experiences. There is nothing that moves anyone's conscience or motivates action than when you have a role model of this kind who is able to talk about their own experience. I'll give you one example as well. When I assumed the ECOSOC presidency, it's a recent thing, I have your press team that is supporting me. We have Paul Simon, who is working closely with me. So he came with a suggestion that I should release an article in Journal Afrique and other big media to just tell my story. So, and then he said, okay, I can initiate a draft and you look at it and you have your input to make it original, yeah? So the opening line was one which said, growing up in Africa, right? And then I said to my team, I was like, no, I don't think this will inspire anybody. It's too broad. I didn't grow up in Africa, but I grew up in my village. So I modified that opening line to say, to make sure that people know where I grew. Growing up in Africa, it can mean you grew up in the city. It's not really meaningless. I found the reference to growing up in the village much more appealing to motivating anyone who is currently struggling with any challenges in the village, might really get more inspired that if I made it to be an ambassador in the first place and then ECOSOC president, I would think that any village boy or girl would be much more inspired than just saying growing up in Africa or growing up in Botswana. So I think this kind of role modeling involving them, it's much more impactful because people have lived those experiences, going around trying to tell others to change certain behaviors becomes even much more easier when this kind of role models are involved. So very powerful messaging and very interesting story. I read it myself before, and I know where he has come from.
And there is that saying, it takes a village, so it also to change.
Precisely.
But I think, you know, we at the UN, and I know at UNFPA, we count on and we have goodwill ambassadors and celebrity supporters because they do have such a following and can deliver messages. But I wanted to ask Dr. Natalia Kanem from UNFPA. I mean, one of the things I have always heard about domestic violence is that there is a cycle. And it looks like he broke the cycle of violence. Mm-hmm. That very often when men witness their fathers, acting violently against their mothers or even themselves, that they become perpetrators later. They can't break it. That's their learned experience. Is that true, or is that?
Well, it's important to note that there is a whole host of stressors on an individual, on a family, on a community, and that does not in any way excuse a violent outcome. So as UNFPA has done research, and we partnered with Promundo and other outfits as well, to really look at that cyclical nature and how does one interrupt it, what became very clear is that adolescence is very key to reverse that type of norm. I wouldn't want to call it a norm, but that kind of behavior. So behavior can change. I mean, it's created by society. Culture is created every day. And I think the activation of societal values, the compassion, the understanding that you can interrupt violence, and that came out also in the athlete statement. The idea that I can share the responsibility for protecting someone is something that can be activated at a very young age. The fact is that the shame and stigma that's attached to being a victim makes people doubly a victim. And to have a male authority figure, you know, whoever it may be, locally, all the way up to internationally, gives people permission to speak. And I think that was another part of the statement that was very beautiful, to hear a top athlete say, I'm willing to ask. I don't know everything, but I am willing to try to uphold the standard that says we're all equal. This is really important for the solution to the problem. Men and boys are a big part of the solution, and I think it's really important to have their voices added to the demand that women are making to not sweep this under the carpet anymore.
Exactly.
Can I offer a personal reflection on this? Because you know, when I first came to the UN, I was the Swedish ambassador, and it was just as the Swedish government announced that they would have a feminist foreign policy. And I have to be very open with you, and I say, what does this mean for me as a man representing a feminist foreign policy? You know, I almost internally felt that, isn't this a little bit provocative against us men? You know, is feminism directed against men? And how do you credibly represent that if you are a man, right? But then we entered into the Security Council of the United Nations, which deals with peace and security. And it was very easy for me, I have to say, to internalize this notion of feminism if it means that, you know, look at the UN. We've failed for years in dealing with international peace and security. The Security Council has failed so many people around the world. So it wasn't so difficult just to explain to my colleagues who got a little bit tired of me always speaking about these women, you know, to say that, look, let's at least try to put women around the table, because obviously just having men there has not brought us very much success, right? Yeah. So, but I think it's also important to understand that it might be a little bit of a process for some men to sort of take on that role, and also to do it with credibility. So I think we have to help some of them along gender-based violence is a different thing altogether. I mean, there's no excuse for any perpetrator. No. But I think, as you've been saying, there is also a societal power structures and cultural, notion of male dominance that some of these young boys are growing up in. So we also have to help that along through various, actions.
I think that's a really great pivot to maybe looking at the future. I mean, Sweden has and advertises, we have a feminist foreign policy. I think that really kind of unsettled the world. And yes, and then you moved into the Security Council. There's lots of demand for more women and around the table. And but I wonder if we could maybe do a round on, because obviously you represent countries, and we've talked a lot about what's happening at the community level, at figures who are iconic in society, making a difference. The Spotlight Initiative has, incredible. I think they've reached 880,000 men and boys with messages about positive masculinity, respectful relationships, nonviolent conflict resolution. But a lot of it, has to come also from the top. There have to be laws. I mean, there have to be changes that are initiated from the state. So maybe just from the level, if you're put on your Swedish cap, but then also maybe at the EU level, what can be done to help the situation and ease the violence for women and girls?
I'm certainly no expert on this, but I think that it has to be on very many levels. I think you're absolutely right to say that if you want to change society, it also has to come from leaders, from the top, from politicians, from those who construct the laws, right? You have to make very clear what is prohibited and what is not. And then you have to implement those laws, and that implies also, punishment for violence. But you can't just put people to jail without also then, there has to be preventive work for people who are detained so that they don't then fall back into these situations. So that's part of it. But I think what we've also learned is that there has to be a lot done on community level, school curricula, starting very, very early about, as we said before, finding the role models and involving men in all this work, from the outset, from the start, on community level. Far too often, I'm a gender champion here, and I know Colleen and others are as well, which we've committed never to sit on a panel which is all men, right? All male.
As they're called.
Right, But I also don't like to see that when we discuss these things, there is a panel of only women, right?
Right.
So I think, because I think this is so important that you engage the men to, of course, think about their own role in all this and reflect on their relations with their mother and their daughters and all that. It's super important, but also to make sure that they're part of the solution, I think, and that has to happen on the community level as well.
Indeed. Have you seen any manels lately?
No.
Very good, very good. So the UN is doing something right, but how about at the El Salvador national level? Are there any measures, policies, laws that you want to point out that have helped?
I guess that we have done a lot with the Spotlight Initiative, and as I was mentioning not so long ago, it has been great to have this partnership with the UNCT, with the whole UN system. Natalie mentioned about how UNFPA is working, but also we see UNICEF working as well. We see UNDP, and you see all this partnership and strong collaboration with the all UN system, talking with the same vocabulary, with the same voice. We have allies also that are helping us. So it's like an amplifier of the activities and actions that the government is setting. In El Salvador, a Spotlight has 6 pillars, and some of them is, for instance, legislation. So we're doing all this overview about these different laws in El Salvador and try to incorporate also the gender lens on it. other issue is precisely training. Training to public officers to try to them to understand about gender-based violence and gender equality as well. I mean, and when you're talking about this training, it's not only to women. We need men. That's precisely this conversation about, to bring men on board. And also, as Olaf was mentioned in Spotlight in El Salvador, it's about prevention and addressing also the victims. So we have different hotlines to address this kind of issues, and that women, but also girls, can know that there is a place to go if they have been victims of this kind of violence. Olaf was reflecting, if you allow me, in a very, very personal experience about your feminist foreign policy. In my case, I was finding myself in something similar when I came here to the UN for the first time. I was assigned to cover different kind of human rights issues. Some of them was gender issues. And I was shocked that I didn't know about my own rights as a woman until I was here. So it's also very important to have the women and girls to understand their rights, their worth. What you were saying, Natalia, how important it is for them to know that they have value and that they cannot be victims of this kind of abuse. So when we're working in this kind of initiative, that's why Spotlight is so comprehensive, because it also brings boys and men to the table, but it raises awareness to women about their own issues.
Thank you, Griselda. It looks like
Sign me up, yeah.
everybody is nodding, so
Yeah.
I'm going to ask, I wonder if Ambassador Kayla Pillay is Spotlight initiative in Botswana, and how is it helping?
I frankly haven't followed it that closely, but I would think the experience would be the same with the other colleagues, really. I think the points that Olaf started off and Agri has just added, our societies have been designed in the way they are for years, and I think Natalia was correct to say that it won't disappear overnight. That points to a lot of work that needs to be done at different levels. First, we've already said the community's involvement. We've just spoken about the role models. But I think an area that can make the difference is exactly the topic that is before us today. What role do men and boys see in this process? They have to see themselves as stakeholders and partners in this. I mean, this is a societal problem, which of course created behaviors which then got reinforced by certain norms in society. Doing the process of unlearning that would require a similar process of involving everybody, both men and women, boys and girls. So I would think that, but it can't end at national level, certainly. As I said earlier on, at global level, we've got mechanisms that we can use. We are lucky to have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which for me, it creates a very important platform that as we report on what we are doing to implement the 2030 Agenda, we should really pay attention to the cross-cutting nature of this kind of issues. We are going to be having 45 countries presenting their voluntary national reviews in July before the HLPF. I think it is really important for all countries that are going to be getting this opportunity to be held to account on what they are doing in these particular issues. So I think that as much as it is a voluntary process, it has become very popular. I think it's very effective. It offers us a very important mechanism to enforce some kind of global standards where at least we can move together globally rather than acting in silos at national levels.
Well, that's very good to hear that is making progress. The 2030 Agenda is obviously with COVID-19 and now with the Ukraine war. And I would be remiss, Natalia, if I didn't ask you a question, because I know you just returned from Moldova, where, a country that has been receiving thousands and thousands and thousands of refugees from Ukraine, and you know, a country that is struggling itself, and so, you know, the proportion is to its population is just as big as the numbers who've come into Poland, and they're mostly women and girls.
That's right.
And they're fleeing violence. And I know that you've told me, and that we all know, that in conflict, the risks of violence being perpetrated against women and girls rises. So what is your worry for those women and girls that you met and those who are still coming across?
Within Ukraine and in all of the bordering countries, which really have had a decisive response in welcoming the women and girls in the main who are streaming across the borders, there's worry anytime there's conflict that there is a breakdown in society, in the health system, et cetera, that the possibility of women being victimized, children being victimized as they cross borders increases. And so the UN, the whole humanitarian system, the very valiant NGOs that are providing service right at those borders are being very vigilant, especially for issues of human trafficking, and especially for the question of what is the source of protection when you're running with a backpack and a child in each hand, and you really don't know where you're going to lay your head in the middle of winter tonight. So we sound the alarm that the most vulnerable need protection, and UNFPA and others take up that duty under the umbrella of the refugee agency, UNHCR, to assure women that they will be safe and to have recourse. Because even when we think about this issue in a general sense, and I think it's been really interesting listening to the others here today, gender-based violence is not an abstract thing. It's a very personal, intimate thing. It's going to affect my life, my health. It's a personal issue. It's a health issue that can lead to lifelong depression and worse if not treated. Luckily, there are interventions that can help to repair the damage. I think men, women, boys, girls, everybody needs to understand that this is also a huge economic issue. The loss of days worked and the ability to provide for your family and the cycle of poverty are reinforced by the perpetration of this pandemic, which does need to come out of the shadows, this gender-based violence. And ultimately, and I think everybody alluded to it in your comments, it's really a question of power. Gender-based violence is about power. And we need to change that power dynamic in the minds of very young people. Comprehensive sexuality education and life skills addresses this in a way so that the power relations and the validity of our ability to be respectful to each other is something that can be taught in a school, in a police training court, to the magistrate who has to judge, do I sweep this under the rug again, or do I bring justice to this woman who's come with the complaint? So ultimately, I think the politics of the issue, and you know, Ambassador Kayla said as much, has to involve everybody. It's not segregated by gender, and men and boys should step up. They should be vocal and visible, and they should be counted among those who wish to see a decisive end to gender-based violence once and for all.
Thank you so much for that, Natalia. That's, I think, a very good way to move to our next segment, because we get to hear now from the European Union Commissioner for International Partnerships, Jutta Urpilainen, who has shared her thoughts on the issue via this video message.
Dear friends, we will only stop gender-based violence if men and boys are part of the conversation. We need fathers, husbands, sons, and brothers to know that they are allies, that there is a choice to support, respect, protect. My sincere thanks to global advocate Sia Kolisi. Role models like you really inspire others. The EU aims to set a good example too. Our ambitious Gender Action Plan promotes gender equality and women empowerment in external relations. And the EU-UN Spotlight Initiative drives forward global policy on gender-based violence and serves as a unique model of multilateral partnership, now and for the future. In Argentina, for example, Spotlight has teamed up with the National Sports Department to build community dialogue between athletes, coaches, and managers. Its global knowledge platform will bring together best practices, partnerships, and coalitions formed in the fight against gender-based violence. So today, let me call on others to join this global initiative. Help us turn commitments we have taken at Generation Equality last year into action to build a truly gender-equal world.
I'd like to thank the Spotlight Initiative and the group of friends for the elimination of violence against women and girls for putting this important dialogue together. From myself and the guests in the studio, Olaf, Griselda, Colin, Natalia, thank you so much for watching.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too.